used music to cope with grief and hard feelings around my mom dying and her death. But it was really, the songwriting was one of the most powerful pieces of that for me. It was that writing piece. And the older I got, the more I started writing. And I started to write essays and to create zines and poetry. I started to write poetry that I thought was probably terrible and I was never going to show anyone, but I did. I have, I think 3 huge Tupperware totes full of journals, and I still always keep journals. One thing that I've done with my writing is free writing and setting a timer and allotting really specific time and space to write about my feelings, especially when they're like really intense feelings, the kind of feelings that when I was really fresh and young in my grief, where I might have responded by self-harming. A strategy that I have learned since and really honed since is this externalization of those intense feelings through writing. So I set a timer, and, you know, depending on how I'm feeling, I start sometimes with just 3 minutes, and then I just write for that 3 minutes, and it doesn't have to make sense. There doesn't have to be a plan. There doesn't have to be a plot. There doesn't have to be a structure. It's just about getting those feelings out of my body and out of my mind and on a piece of paper. And sometimes that 3 minutes I set the timer for, sometimes it's 5 minutes. Sometimes it's as long as 30 minutes. It took me a while to work up to that because that's a really long time to focus for me. But it's helpful that I am giving myself permission for however long that timer is on. The only thing that I am responsible for is writing about whatever I'm feeling. And sometimes I choose to rip out that piece of paper from my notebook and I burn it. And that feels really cathartic. It sounds kind of cheesy, but it works really well for me anyway. Sometimes I go back and read my writing afterwards and turn it into something that's more cohesive, whether that's an essay or poetry, or something else entirely. Sometimes I read it back and reflect on it or send it to my therapist. Sometimes I never look at it again. No matter what, it's a helpful exercise for me. And the other way I use writing to cope with my grief is poetry, especially when I was going through my recurrent miscarriages. Writing poetry was really powerful for me. I like to do a style of poetry called short order poetry that I usually do in public spaces, like at festivals or similar kind of events. And it's where I get to sit in conversation with a person, usually someone I don't know at all, for 3 to 5 minutes. We chat. I sit down at a typewriter. I write a poem based on that conversation, and I post it on a piece of line, and they can come and find it and take the poem later. That style of writing has also been really, really powerful for me in dealing with my grief, because there's that element of connecting with other people and externalizing feelings that I can clearly relate to. I wouldn't be able to write about them, but also that the person I'm collaborating with in that way can take ownership of. So it's, a little less intense than if I'm just writing for myself. I also collaborated during that time with a close friend on a series of poems that we turned into conceptual photos. And that was really powerful, again, because I'm able to connect with another person over the writing that I'm doing and also create a visual component. So just that way of creatively expressing what was going on for me, having my feelings actively do something has been really, really helpful for me.